back over and
Yeah.
over. This is something that we absolutely love doing, talking about history and writing, and today's topic especially about history and writing. So these three women are the perfect people to be talking about fact versus fiction in writing. We have Anne Louise Bannon, who writes Old California. Her latest is Death of the Chinese Field Hands, book 3 of her Old Los Angeles series. We have Linda McLaughlin, who writes historical romance set in colonial America, the British Isles, and the American West, including her latest, Lily and the Gambler. A.E. Wasserman, who writes 1800s London and California, mostly separate, but sometimes she gets both in there, like with her 1886 Ties That Bind, story of politics, graft, and greed. And I'm your moderator, Janet Wertman. I write historical fiction set in the Tudor era. And
as opposed to the four-door era.
Right, exactly. So because this is November, this topic is, we're also going to be giving some writing tips because it is National Novel Writing Month. I don't know if anyone out there is doing it. Tell me in the chat if any of you are participating. It's where you go crazy and write 50,000 words in a single month. But the writing tips that we're going to be talking about, even if none of you is actually doing it, is always, oh, wonderful. I am too. The writing tips are always going to be helpful no matter what kind of historical fiction or in all likelihood, a lot of other fiction you're going to be writing. So anyway, with that said, the basic topic is how much are authors allowed to bend the truth to improve the story? Because we all do have to bend. Just writing dialogue requires bending, but each of us has a line we won't cross. And that's going to be my first question that I'm going to pop out to all of the panelists. What's your line? And I'm going to ask you to give an example, start with the book and, you know, contextualize it for us, and then tell us the bit you changed and why. Going by alphabetical order, I'm going to say, and this is a tough one. AE,
well, actually, I think mine is first because of that, but I'll go anyway. Actually, one of my lines is this one. This is Death of the City Marshal. And it's based on, actually, both it and Death of the Chinese Field Hands are based on actual events in LA history. Death of the City Marshal is based on the gunfight between Marshal William Warren, who was one of LA's first police chiefs, and his deputy, Joseph Dye. They were fighting over a hooker. I kid you not. You cannot make this stuff up. But they were both a couple of hotheads, and they got into this gun battle on October 31st, 1870. And in real life, Warren died of his wounds. I fudged because I write whodunits, and you can't really have a whodunit if you know whodunit. So it just doesn't work real well. So I fudged that that they had in fact had that Warren was going to survive his wounds, but that somebody else killed him. And that, of course, is the basis of the mystery that, you know, Maddie actually has to solve. And so what line will I not cross? I'm not going to get too crazy. I mean, I'll play around with what if. But one of the things I did in this book, not only did I fudge the fact that Warren did die of his wounds, but I kept it as much accurate as I could for the rest of it, going by a lot of the newspaper accounts and Scott Zetch's excellent book, because he can get to the court records at a Huntington library and I can't. So, but I kept to that. But I also made a point of making it reasonable that everyone else would know what the record was, as opposed to, you know, so that, you know, the Common Council really wanted everybody to believe that Joe Dye had killed killed him. So we're going to go with that. So I made it reasonable that the record stood that way, but we knew what really happened, which actually didn't, but it's okay.
That's what author's notes are for.
Yeah, and that's what I did do. I also, that's the other thing I will do, is if I do fudge something, believe me, it's in the author notes as much as I can. So.
Okay. Amanda, AE, same question.
Hi. Well, this question really sort of stumped me when I started to, really think about it in terms of my own novels. Aside from the dialogue, of course, which, you mentioned that it has to be readable by today's standards. I strive for as much accuracy as possible. And if anything, I bend the story to fit in with the time and the place. So I have a line that I pretty much just won't cross when it comes to accuracy. I want the reader to feel a genuine sense of time travel when I pick them up and I plunk them, right on a street corner in Victorian England or California or France. Last week, actually, true story, I'm not bending this at all. I had a reader contact me who is a California resident, and he just finished reading 1886 Ties That Bind, which takes place in San Francisco and California's Central Valley. And he said he was amazed about how much he learned about California history from the story. He told me that he'd read something in the novel and then he'd go and look it up, and sure enough, that part of the book was true. And I said, well, he loves reading mysteries. It was a real bonus that he could learn history. So that really made me feel good about my great effort to be accurate. But I do bend the story. In the first novel in the Langsford series, 1884, No Boundaries, events unfold that expose terrorists and espionage. And I'd written about half of the first draft when my research had, led me to a real gem of the history that I had no clue about. And I can't say more without giving it away, but I took that story's timeline and I backed it up, several weeks so that the actual history was accurately in the climax of the book. And so I don't tend to bend the facts if I can help it. I don't do it on purpose, but I do bend the story. And so I'll wrap the story around the history.
Oh, now, Linda, you write historical romance, which is a subgenre with its own rules. Is the rule different there, or, the line rather?
Not necessarily. The main difference with romance is that the developing relationship is the main plot, and everything else is backstory or subplot. And so you still have to do all the research that any other author would have to do. And so, but one thing that is important is the social mores of the time and the courtship rules, and that's one of the areas that I try not to bend too much. For instance, now my first historical romance, Rogue's Hostage, kind of straddles the line between romance and fiction because it's still a romance, but the characters are kind of thrown into one of the great events of the time, the French and Indian War. And the story includes some real, if not well-known people, and several of the battles, like the big one on the Plains of Abraham. Anyway, I was reading a book about the history of my hometown, which is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which started as Fort Duquesne, the French fort. And I learned that the French officers, who were mostly younger sons of the nobility, would strip down to a loincloth and go out on the raiding parties with the native allies. And I thought, oh, now that would be an interesting hero. That's how that got started. But knowing the social mores of the time, I couldn't quite wrap my mind around an aristocrat following for my very common Swiss-born heroine. And so I made him an aristocratic bastard. Now, the chance of a guy like that actually having a commission in the French army was probably slim to none. I figured a few sous in the right pocket and anything is possible. So a little bit different way of drawing a line, I guess, but I still had to bend it a little bit.
That's really interesting. So one of the things you said, you kind of make me wonder, does the line change depending on how big the issue is?
Oh,
in other
yeah.
words,
Absolutely.
I mean, how free do you feel just like messing up on the little things?
I will I've checked weather reports.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
I've checked weather reports.
Yeah.
If you can find them,
I try to do that, but
yeah.
you know, I want to be accurate. Let's put it this way. I mean, yeah, occasionally I will bend things. I mean, there's my 1920s series. I've got another novel, and I can't say which one because it'll spoil it. But part of it's based on a conspiracy theory that was popular at the time. And I thought, what if? You know, which I thought would be fun to play with. But the reality is, and it's in the author notes, no, that probably didn't happen. But at the same time, it's, you know, I'm writing fiction. I'm not writing history. I don't do footnotes. You know? And my husband, the historian, is in the other room going, no, you don't. So the bottom line is, but at the same time, I really want to get it right, because I know somebody out there checked the frickin' weather reports in Los Angeles in 1870. So.
Well, my editor caught me on one thing when I was writing, I think it was like 1886 Ties that Bind. And I used a phrase in it like, you know, I've got your back. And, you know, I have my radar up, and I can usually catch things, you know, that are not, you know, accurate, but I missed this one. And so, you know, he tells me like, no, I think that was after World War II, or I don't remember now. But, you know, it's those little things that if someone really knows, it's going to drop them out of the story. It's going to like, and then my credibility as a historical fiction author, you know, goes down. So I try to catch as much as I can. And although I do, you know, have my typical disclaimer, any errors are of course mine, you know, but I love it when my editor catches me. Oh no, I really don't. I wish I'd caught it myself, but yeah, I mean, you know, so, you know, the small is still important. You know, you can get away with a little bit of stuff, and, you know, so it rained in London on that afternoon. Who cares, unless it's part of the story, and then it's important.
Well, and also sometimes there's the other part of the problem is that you can't get the correct information. You have to suppose. And I had an incident that happened to me. Oh, I was so embarrassed and so frustrated. Between Death of the City Marshal and Death of the Chinese Field Hands, in fact, when I was writing Death of the Chinese Field Hands, I had gone to the libraries, I had gone everywhere trying to figure out when sterile surgery came into, people started using it. And keep in mind, my character's a doctor, and she's one of those progressive types. So I had to know this, and I was trying to find it. Well, I finally got this wonderful site that you can download historical medical journals.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I was in heaven. So I'm reading the California Medical Gazette from 1869. And the first article in it is a story on bad air, which was one of the disease theories they used to have, that it was bad air coming from the swamps and everything that caused disease. But I'm going into this, and I'm reading through this, and damned if there wasn't Joseph Lister's article on sterile surgery in the Gazette. I've already written 2 books without sterile surgery taking place in 1870. I was furious. And I'm getting, and at this point, I'm trying to get Chinese Field Hands together. So I had to change things. Now, I did have one advantage near the end of Death of the City Marshal. I burned up Maddie's journals in a house fire. So, and I had somebody who read this, and I told her this is why that particular, she said, you gotta be kidding. She didn't even realize that I had goofed. And so, but I had attributed the goof to the fact that Maddie's journals burned up, and all she had were her sister's letters to, because these are journals that she's writing much later in the thing. But I was like,
that is wonderful. That's actually a lesson that we're learning from The Crown and the big brouhaha that's going on. I don't know, in Tudor circles, it's really big, I have to tell you.
Yeah.
The idea that if you get the little tiny details right, everyone is going to assume you're getting the really big ones right as well.
True. That's
yes.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's true, because I think it's the little stuff we tend to mess up on, because
Oh, yeah.
usually the stuff you didn't think you had to look up that turns out to be wrong. you were so sure of. You know, like my favorite example is from what Kathleen Windsor's Forever Amber, which is set in the 1660s, English Restoration period. And from what I could tell, she had done meticulous research into the period. All the details seem to really ring true. But then Amber goes to see an astrologer who manages to plot the positions of Uranus and Neptune in her chart decades before either of them was discovered. That was the one thing she thought she didn't need to research.
That's another, that brings us right into the topic of how do you keep yourself honest? How do you keep all of the stuff? Do you write a little, you know, AE? I know that like you wrote a dime novel about a stagecoach robber. How do you keep yourself honest with something like that?
Well, what's nice about a dime novel is you don't have to. You know, dime novels were originally, you know, they're the precursors of paperbacks, and they would take somebody who was, you know, famous like Annie Oakley or Jesse James, and you know, these were the characters, the celebrities of the day, and there's been a story around it. So in the Notorious Black Bart, my dime novel, A Journey Back, 1883, there's only 3 main facts in it. Black Bart was a real stagecoach robber, and 2, he did indeed rob the stagecoach where the story opens, and 3, Detective Hume, who worked for Wells Fargo that ran the stagecoach line, did pursue Black Bart. So all this said, though, I still had to research the terrains of the mountains and the foothills. You know, it was a big chase, the steamboats, the trains, the locations, and the roads in 1883 in California. So even though the storyline was made up, the facts still had to be found, you know, to create the world of Black Bart. So just don't believe the story. It didn't happen that way, but you know, it was fun. What led me to this is that in 1886, Ties That Bind. I have to stop and make sure it's the right novel. 1886, Ties That Bind. Langsford was reading a dime novel on the train as he left San Francisco. So I thought, I wonder if I can write the one he's reading. And so that's what led me into that. And just sort of like a challenge, and it was fun. And so, you know, it's just the one time I could like not worry about if it was right or not. But, you know, that's rare. That's very rare.
How about you, Anne? Now, I know that you have like an extra little entree to the LA archives.
Yes, I am married to the archivist for the city of Los Angeles. And yeah, that does help a lot with terminology, but not so much actually. Believe it or not, when it comes to terminology and phraseology, I turn to Louisa May Alcott because that is Maddie's voice. I also have 2 or 3, you know, Victorian language sites bookmarked in my web browser, so that as I'm writing on, okay, when was that? And I Google a lot. When was such and such used? When was such and such used? Yeah. And I just, I can't function without that. It's just amazing. I mean, I remember when I was doing the 1920s series way back in the 80s, and I've since rewritten it, of course, but I mean, I had a friend who, God bless her, was up at 2 a.m. and I could call her and say, Joyce, what do you call one of those things with a stick and a chain and little iggy medieval balls on them for whacking people? And she goes, oh, a morning star. Oh, okay. Yeah, but I mean, that was like, you know, that was research in the 80s and 90s, you know, research now, it's just,
yeah.
And I do double check it. I have to say, I don't just go with whatever I see the first time out. I always make sure there's at least 2 or 3 others in agreement, as long as it's not obvious that this site copied that site. Yeah. That doesn't count.
Well, I mean, and that's what we call going down the rabbit hole. We go down,
God, yes.
Get lost for hours. We laugh about that a lot, right, Linda? You know, so yeah, we're looking for something, and sort of like I might have, you know, land on a Wikipedia page. I don't stay there. I go down and look at the sources, and then I find those, and I look at those sources, and I, you know, just down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think it also depends on how big the fact is. You know, what kind of pens were they using? Sometimes it's I just go, you know, a quick one, but some of the other stuff, you know, phrases, yeah, I'm double, triple checking those all the time. And I'm sure something modern still slips through. You know, you can't help it. It's like Linda
I'll tell
and
you.
Janet said.
Somebody will tell you if it does.
And yeah, and like Linda and Janet said, it's the stuff you think you don't need to look up that always gets you in the end.
Right. I want to ask this question. I want to make sure that I hear the answer from Linda, because she assembles facts from two entirely different universes, Britain and the American West. And so that's like, how do you organize that amount of research? Is it, you know?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, with the internet, you know, I just went over with my electronic files. I have a different folder for each book to start with. I have a separate subfolder for research, a separate subfolder for characters, one for images. So I keep that stuff organized that way. And any paper stuff goes into a folder or a ring binder, depending on how much I have. I have a whole big 3-ring binder of Regency stuff, amongst other things, but I only work on one project at a time. So I'm either focusing on the British stuff or the American stuff, which helps a lot. The problem is that English slang, especially the Regency slang, is so addicting that I find it sometimes creeping into my Westerns. And thankfully I have a critique group and they'll go, where did this come from? Oh, sorry, that's a little Regency. Let me reword that. You know, like saying someone is high in the instep instead of saying full of himself.
So, okay, we've just been talking about how incredibly careful we're being, and Anne, you started to talk about this before, and I want to get back to it because I loved your story there. Did anybody have an experience where you suddenly had to rewrite an ending? I mean, this is a little bit before your story, Anne, where you suddenly, and same with you, and because you learned a new fact late. That was
I had to rewrite, well, I did end up rewriting the end of Chinese Field Hands as a result of what I discovered. And in the original, somebody gets shot who is close. I can't say how, because, you know, you don't want to. But somebody ends up getting shot who shouldn't be, and Maddie's doing emergency surgery in the place where they're at. And it was kind of fun to do. But see, there were two things that happened as I was getting Chinese Field Hands ready to go and Death of the City Marshal. One was that I had found these, you know, primary documents, and I love primary documents. But I found these medical journals. But the other thing that had happened is my good friend, Dr. Paula Bernstein, who is a member of the Sisters in Crime with me and writes the Dr. Hannah Klein mysteries. And if you ever get a chance to read those, highly recommend them. They are contemporary, but they are delightful. And Paula is even more delightful. She is just the most wonderful person. And she is a retired OB-GYN. So all of a sudden, now I've got, and she volunteered. She says, oh, I'll be your medical consultant. I said, what? Okay, yeah, I can go with this. So I'm like peppering her with questions. And it was kind of funny because she told me the other day she was really impressed that I got the medical stuff right, even on the diseases and then the stuff I hadn't consulted her on. But you know, I mean, it's diseases in the 19th century. God damn it, excuse me. They were dropping like flies. I mean, my God, everybody, you had mumps, you had measles, you had pulmonaria, AKA tuberculosis, you had all sorts of stuff, and people are dropping like freaking flies. So I had a lot of fun. I also have a public health record from 1879 that my husband, one of the first LA city public health records of all the ways people died in 1879. I've got a secret for you. At the very bottom, one young man between the ages of 25 and 49 died of masturbation.
no.
I am not joking. I have no idea. I'm like, I really want to know the story behind that one.
That's it? There were no notes? Nothing?
Nothing. Just his age and where he was from. It's like, okay.
So that brings up another question, and I don't want to call this the bad bits, but what do you do with facts that is there anything that, what if you don't want to include something? So a lot of people talk about not really wanting to include slavery and not wanting to include a lot of talks about that. Where is that line, and how does that fit in? And you know, how do we make certain things more palatable now?
Okay, Amanya, Linda, do you have, because Chinese field hands is exactly that.
Right,
Okay.
Go
right.
ahead.
Because I don't want to take over, but at the same time, that is exactly what Death of the Chinese Field Hands is about. It is possibly one of the darkest moments in Los Angeles history, when 18 Chinese men were lynched because of their race.
Mm.
And at that time, the Chinese were hated even more than the African Americans were. And you're dealing with incredible prejudices, and the terms they used for it, and the fact that the newspapers were stoking this up. How do you deal with this? Well, I had to, and it was tough, and I had to back off on some of it, because frankly, there were terms there that I just could not in good conscience use.
Right.
I really couldn't. But at the same time, I had to make sure that people understood that the Chinese were hated. Fortunately, I have Chinese characters who are speaking for themselves. Fortunately, I have a main character who is very progressive for the time. I put it in that her mom was probably a Quaker in spite of the family being Congregationalist, but still, it's tough to find that balance. And in fact, my initial book cover featured the nooses that they were hung from. And everybody's like, ooh, and I said, okay, fine, we'll take that one out. But, you know, it was just, it's tough. And when you're writing 19th century, you cannot avoid the fact that people, especially, you know, people of white European descent, were insanely prejudiced. The guys are marrying the Hispanic women, but they're totally down on the Hispanics. It's just, it's bizarre. It really is.
I think
I'm
I had a
gonna-
line just read. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, no. I was going to say, AE, I want to come back to you, but I want Linda to answer the question now, because I think that might be a little bit lighter than the terrible prejudice that we just heard about, you know, but then again, that's because of my preconceived notions that you're going to tell us more about the bodice ripping in historical romance. And I could be way wrong, but still, the question is to you.
Okay, well, you know, I did the French and Indian War, and so I had to be really careful with the depiction of the Native Americans, and watch some of the terms I used too, but still show that the hatred and fear that the settlers felt for the natives who were rampaging along the frontier. And it was basically state-sponsored terrorism that the French were promoting in order to get the settlers to go back east. And so that was really difficult. And, you know, if anyone's seen the movie version of Last of the Mohicans, you know what that period was like. There was a lot of brutality, scalping, massacres. And so I had to tone some of that down too. So yes, I know that part gets difficult when it's that kind of bad stuff going on. So that's what I wanted to say on that.
Okay, that's right. I forgot that you had that second period.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that. AE, how about you?
Well, I mean, I let the story sort of dictate just how much I'm going to get into some of these prejudices, but certainly, you know, especially when my protagonist Langsford came to California, you know, we're dealing with indigenous people. We're dealing with the Chinese who had been brought over to build our railroads and then turned loose, and, you know, had to survive in some form or another. And again, like both Linda and Anne were talking about, you have to temper that down just a tad. You know, it's not a history book. We would love to, like, you know, show some of that stuff, but you have to make it palatable. And I rely a lot on my beta readers and on my editors as well. When I go in there, I'll tell it like it is, as bluntly as I can get away with. I don't want to sugarcoat it necessarily, but I also don't want to, make it so horrific that you just can't. I mean, I cringe sometimes at the things that I read, and I try not to cringe at the stuff that I write about it. But it's a fine line. You've got to get that story across. You've got to get that whole idea of this is what we were like. It's not PC today, but man, they were right in there. Making sure that the Indians were slaughtered and that the Chinese were, put in basically like ghettos like Chinatown or kept out in the Central Valley with a herd of sheep and away from everybody. So it's a fine line.
I think that it not only is it a fine line, I think it's important that we don't back off too much. And I made that point in the author note for Chinese field hands, because, it's one of those things where you have to put an author note in saying, hey guys, the warning, this is a problem. But you have to say what it is, because I think the only way we're going to ever get past the racism and the issues we face with that in this country is if we stand up and say, okay, this is what we were like. This is how it was. If we don't face that, we're never going to get past it. That's
one of the beauties of historical fiction is that it implies immediately, a compare and contrast, like the old history class, compare and contrast these two novels. But yeah, I mean, we've got today, and so we know what today is like. But then when we see these things, whether they're wonderful or horrific, we know like, oh wow, and hopefully that will keep a stirring going on in the consciousness. So maybe we can serve a purpose when we write this kind of stuff.
Exactly. Thank you. You said it so much better, Amanya.
And it also is how we choose to deal with it. So I had to face this one thing that Henry VIII executed a 75-year-old woman who hadn't really done much. And she didn't want to be executed because she didn't think that she had actually committed treason. So she refused to put her head on the block. And it took 13 strokes to remove her head. And right, but it needed to be in the book because it said something incredible about the character of a man who would insist on that. So instead of putting us in the room, I chose to handle it by having a messenger come in and explain, the third stroke, and have somebody go, there was a third stroke, and it's like there were 13. So I just got to skip it all, but without
showing it,
over it. Exactly.
Very Shakespearean, Janet.
Yeah. Well done.
It was one of those times where you definitely want to tell, not show.
Exactly. Good choice.
But if I could have, I might, see, that was a fact that had to be in there. Have you ever stumbled across a fact that you really wanted to put in, but because of like point of view or some other problem, you couldn't get it in no matter how hard you tried? Is that something that
It's probably happened, but I can't think of anything offhand.
That's just one of those. I know most of the time you are going to be able to squeeze it in. I asked because I had a problem in one of my books with an unreliable child narrator who did not know the stuff that was going on, and there was no way. So let me ask another question, and this I want to hear from all three of you as well, because it's a really big one. Did you start out really, have you always been connected to accuracy, or did that kind of build up as you wrote more and came to realize more importance? Is it something that kind of changes from book to book, or is it as to exactly how accurate you're going to be, or is it like a longer term thing?
I was always in love with history, so that was always kind of the starting point for everything. And so Yeah, I like to, if I can, I want to keep it as accurate as much as possible.
That's true. Now the three of you though you guys are all inventing the stories largely, as opposed to taking actual historical facts and then building the stories around them. So you do have, I guess, a lot of opportunity to add stuff.
It's different when you're writing about real people, I think.
Well,
Yeah,
in my first
fictional
novel, it
character.
was about two real people, and then that's where Langsford, these British peerage, very wealthy, sort of just showed up in a carriage one night at 2 a.m. So that sort of took over the story. But the initial core of the story was a historical story that I was telling, and I'm working on one now that takes place in Ireland in the 1770s. And it's a story about a man. It's not a biography, but it's going to be, I want to put flesh on his bones. So yeah, approaching it that way, when it's a real story, that's a different animal than when you're just like, oh, for my following books with the Langsford series, I had more freedom actually, because those were actually a little easier to write because I wasn't constrained with an actual story. But now I'm finding myself in this new work, totally constrained again, going like, oh my gosh, what have I done? But it is approached differently, but still, accuracy has always been a thing for me. I mean, I'm not a historian. I never liked history until I started writing about it, and I don't know how that. Well, I know how it happened. I found this story that I wanted to tell, and it happened to be in the 1884. So, like, oops, there I am in the genre. So.
Yeah. And I've always been interested in history, and we've got a doggy, but I've always,
dog.
I'm sorry, I'm the ADD poster child. It's sad, but no, I've always loved history, and I have two writing phases in my life. There was the late 80s, early 90s when I was married to a certain ex-husband who, nice guy, but I had a really bad first marriage and I cranked out a lot of stuff. But some of it was historical, and I found myself having to do research pre-internet. So I've done historical research two different ways. And believe me, the internet's a hell of a lot easier. But it can be tricky because you do have to check and make sure that you're not getting it wrong. And also, since my current husband and I have gotten together, God bless him, he's big in the 20s on a lot of levels. He's a film historian, and then later got into the archive biz, and which eventually inspired Death of the Zonhera, which was the first one of my old Los Angeles series. So being as accurate as I could, of course I wanted to. I mean, calling 5 or 6 different librarians trying to figure out if men were wearing wedding bands in the 1920s. Yeah, I was doing things like that back in the 80s and 90s. And yeah, 1990 actually. So yeah, the accuracy was always, the desire to be accurate was always there. Some of that was because I minored in theater history, and I loved history and I wanted to get it right. But there have always been times when I couldn't get the facts. I had to surmise, and sometimes you just have to. I'm still trying to figure out if they were eating moles in Los Angeles in 1870. I can't find anything on it, damn it. There's probably something out there. I just haven't looked hard enough yet. But there's only so much you can do. There's a certain point where you have to crawl out of the damn rabbit hole and start writing. As much as I want to stay there. But it's the reality. And so yeah, accuracy is as best as you can, but it's not a gimme. And it's one of the reasons I don't write. I write about as very few real people as I can, because I really don't. There are a lot of books out there that feature real characters and real people and I don't like it. It throws me out of the story. There are a few exceptions, and there's one series, I forget the author. who writes about real people. And I still like how it comes out, but I generally don't like reading about real people unless it's somebody I had no clue about. You know, I don't want to read about Winston Churchill as a character or Eleanor Roosevelt as a character, because it's just, no, that just throws me out.
I do like what you have to say. Okay, so two things that you just said that I absolutely love. First of all, thank you to the superhero librarians that we have all called and have actually come through for us.
Oh, they are my best friends. I love them.
Times.
Some of the guys will get tongue. That's it. You know, it's bad.
Right. And two, you also said at one point, at some point you have to put the facts behind you and just start writing. And that is the perfect segue to the second portion of this, which is about NaNoWriMo. And, or even if you're not doing it, there were a couple of people doing it out there who mentioned that you're going along, and good job, keep going. Even if you don't finish this month, just, it's
Keep
worth
going.
it, keep going.
What's your words, babe?
Writing tips. I want to hear your writing tips. AE, let me hear yours.
Writing tips. Well, you know, sit down and write. put your bottom on the chair and you know, keep going. I've not done a nano writing at all, but I do. You know, I think the important thing is just to write and to keep writing, even if you think it's not good. Hemingway said that the first draft of anything is shit, which is true. And you know, in fact, he even said, "Write drunk, edit sober." So there's also that. But
Damn you stole my quote.
You get it, you get it down, and then you've got something to work with. You can, you know, tear off half of it, throw it away, start over, but it gets your mind and your body kind of, you know, in this mindset where you're able to start writing the story. And even if you don't think it's going well, then all of a sudden the dam will open and you can have, you know, just the floodgates and you just can't stop writing. So I think that, you know, don't be afraid to, like, as Anne said, you know, start writing.
Excellent. Linda, how about you?
Yeah, same thing, you know, button share, fingers on the keyboard. And even if it's, you know, if you have to set a timer for 15 minutes or 35 minutes or whatever, and tell yourself, okay, I'm going to sit here and write for at least that much time. And then usually you end up going longer once you get started. And like Nora Roberts has always said, you can't fix the blank page. You got to put something down.
Very, very true.
But for Nano, I haven't done Nano, but I did book in a week one time. And for me, it was a lot. I wrote like 110 pages in a week. By the sixth day, my hands were tingling. So keep an eye, you know, pay attention to your hands. If they start tingling or hurting, you're typing too much. Because
Well, they do tell you, sit down at the keyboard, start typing, and bleed. So you know, like,
that's what they say, open a vein.
yeah, exactly.
They do tell you that. Anne?
God, I just had it for a second there. I think the other thing is, finally, learn to trust yourself. There is so much advice out there on how to write and what you should do. And I know there have been, like, really, and these are, like, you know, people who are bestsellers, you know, who are saying, you need to do it this way. And I'm looking at them and thinking, if I did it that way, I'd never get a freaking thing written. And so at some point you have to say, okay, you may have a point about that, but I know this is right. And you got to trust that gut instinct. And it's one of the toughest things to learn. There was, and you know, the funny thing is, when I was writing Fascinating Rhythm, which is the first in the 1920s series that I write, there is a moment where, you know, and one of the characters is a novelist and he's talking to his editor, who he also falls in love with, but that's another issue. And anyway, so Freddie says, he's saying that he's had this book that he's written to editor after editor after editor, And everybody's saying all something weird about it. And then he says, then I got your letter. And it was as if Moses came down from the mountain and said, this is the way thou shalt go. And he knew she was right. Well, he didn't know she was a she then, but that's a different part of the story. And anyway, and the weird thing was, is I had written this, and I had written this like years. And I'm sending the dang thing out, and I'm thinking I've got a pretty darn good manuscript here, and I did. And I know I did because everybody was saying, well, I can't figure out what's wrong with this, but something's wrong. Until finally I hit the one editor who said, oh, you need this. And I went, anyway, I can get naughty. But I sat there and went, Moses came down from the mountain and said, this is the way thou shalt go. And that's literally happened. So I knew it wasn't perfect. I knew there was a problem. I was writing book 4 in that series, Blood Red, and I knew this wasn't perfect, and I knew it was a problem. And my editor said, this is what's wrong. And I went, and and
Right.
So you can trust your gut. You can say, hey, this is the part that works. Okay, if that's not, and there have been times when somebody else, I would, in fact, it was a short story that later got accepted in Malice Domestic's latest anthology. And somebody said, I have a problem with this particular character. I have a problem with this particular part. And I'm going, but that particular part's right. The setup's wrong. So it's a matter of learning how to trust your gut, to be willing to listen. You got to be willing to listen.
Right.
Because there's a lot of great advice out there too. But also, there's a lot of crap advice out there. So you have to know not just what's the good advice, what's the bad advice. Trust what's the advice that's going to work for you.
Right.
And that's really, really different.
You can't dictate a creative process. You have
cannot.
to until you find your own, and then you've got, your feet under you and you go forward. But yeah, nobody can tell you what your creative process is or is not.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Such
Yeah.
an inspiring and soulful set of answers. I'm sitting here saying, use the forums. These wonderful things, and I'm like, use the forums.
Use the forums, for God's sakes.
The forums on Nano, and that is
great.
one of the most wonderful things about writing your novel during this month. Is that if you have a single question, you can go to the forum and just ask, and you just sit there. And I remember reading like this one thing that it would be like one of you guys, not mine. I have an 18th century woman and I need to get her outside on the prairie at 2 o'clock in the morning. Why? And people will come and they'll give you little plot points. So for those of you who are doing Nano, that is a really good tip. And for the rest of you, consider please.
Yeah. And as far as Nano is concerned, I haven't officially been doing Nano, but a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I was in a writing drought. And I mean, this was like a 20-year writing drought. It was sad. And I had my third Freddie and Kathy that I had been trying to finish for years. And I mean, years and years and years, and nothing happened. I signed up for Nano and I got it done. And it opened the floodgates up. And it made all the difference in the world in what I was able to write. And the best part was The Last Witnesses was one of the best of the 4 Freddie and Kathy's. It's a damn good novel. And I just, and then I wrote Death of the Sahara, which is easily one of the best things I've ever written. Although people are saying Death of the Chinese Field Hands is pretty darn good too. And I'm like, okay, that one fought me. But it did. Yeah. But Nano, I totally believe in NaNoWriMo. I really do. I've had the privilege of doing the Night of Writing Dangerously up in San Francisco, which is only the most insane fun you can have. I've done it twice with my daughter, which was even better. And if you've ever done that, it's a big room full of candy and other writers and word sprints. It's nuts. And it's dinner and all sorts of other crazy things. And it's a blast. It really is.
Excellent. I definitely, for the people out there, I hope you're doing it. I don't want to miss, we don't have very many questions, but there's one really good one that I want to make sure that we talk about writing schedules. And what are your writing schedules? And if you are doing that, now tell us about the two different ones.
You guys tell, I've got a crazy story on writing schedules.
Okay. AE?
Well, I don't have any schedules. I just, I do it when I do it, and I work it in within, I live in the mountains, and so I go hiking when I want to, and most of my writing happens, in the evening, sometimes really late in the early morning. I'm always sort of thinking. So, when I get back to a keyboard, or, and I will write on anything. I'll write on napkins. I get an idea. It doesn't matter. So I'm much more organic, and I'm not organized really in that sense at all. My materials are organized, but me, not so much. I just go hiking up in the woods and the mountains, and plot lines and stuff come. And so that's how I deal with it. It's not very helpful for people.
A lot of hours, or is it like the percolating while you're hiking?
Percolating, yeah. And then I'll sit down and, write for hours, and then I might not write for a little while, but I always do a lot of research. Sometimes when I'm not sure what I really feel like writing, I'll sit down and start doing the research, and, and that. So I do a lot of research to begin with, but then as I start writing, research is always ongoing, it's a parallel process. So, I just, and, I'm working on two different, books at the moment. So I'll go back and forth between the two. So, I'm just a mess when it comes to schedules. I just don't do that.
How about you, Linda?
I'm like Amanya. I'm kind of a mess when it comes to schedules. What's happened recently is one of my friends sets up a Zoom sessions for us to write, and that helps a little bit because that gets me in the chair and with my keys on the fingers on the keyboard. But and I've been struggling this year with, I don't know.
I think everybody has.
With
Yeah.
the COVID thing, it's just been so hard to focus. Between the pandemic and politics, it's been very hard to focus.
Unbelievably difficult. So do you find it easier to write during a Zoom call, or like a, like Anne was talking about?
It gets me there and gets me started. So it has helped. Where on my own, it's like, well, I could do genealogy instead.
Yeah, that works.
It gets your butt in the seat.
Yeah, but I'm not writing. It's a different kind of rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
how addictive those are.
Oh.
Right. And with 4 minutes left, and you got your chance.
Okay. Well,
writing.
actually, the weird thing is that since COVID happened, my writing schedule actually has gotten a little wonky. But I'm kind of at the point where I had a work in progress that basically ate my brain. And so I had to list about 5 or 6 things I'd have to get done during the day, and then I'd go write. That's unusual for me, although that I used to write that way, but it's been unusual. I just after that first Nano, what I basically did was set aside an hour and a half first thing every morning, which was sacred writing time. And yes, and my husband knows the story. You can hear him in the other room going, "Oh, it's the chicken story." Well, my beloved spouse, up until recently, when the predator came along and ate them, was raising chickens. I hate those chickens. I publicly hate the chickens. So, okay, one of them gets loose one day, and of course, it's smack in the middle of sacred writing time. And so, because the damn dog is out in the backyard and where the chicken is, and he's a hound, he's like, "Oh yeah, dinner." And I'm like, So I somehow managed to I'm trying to get the dog away from where the chicken is, get the chicken back into its side yard, and the damn thing's not cooperating with spit. And somehow it ends up in the utility room. Now we have a front loading washer. The door's usually open because if you keep the door closed on a front loading washer, it smells. Okay, so I've got the door open. The chicken goes into the front loading washer. And I'm like, it's sacred writing time. Slammed the door on the front loading washer, went back and wrote for the rest of my hour and a half.
Now, may I interject for a second?
Uh-oh.
I get an email at work that goes as follows. There's a chicken in the washing machine. I sit there and I'm waiting for the punchline.
He panicked. Yes. So I did eventually get the chicken out of the washer and ran a load because there was chicken poo-poo in the washer. I hate it. And it's like, there's just something creepy about holding a chicken. But I got the damn thing out and over the fence and the dog didn't eat it. So unfortunately, last spring or fall sometime, I think it was before COVID, we had a predator come through. End of February, we had a predator come through and ate the little buggers, which was good.
You're wicked.
Eat chickens.
You're so wicked.
So that's the chicken story. And that is the point of it, was sacred writing time. I wrote in spite of the chicken in the washer.
Which is a very important lesson for all of us to learn, is that when you're sitting your butt in the chair, you sit your butt in the chair. So,
Amen.
Amen, amen.
Amen.
I'm like looking at the clock going, this is just, we just slid into that 7:30 mark just beautifully.
Oh my God.
We did. Well done, Janet.
Fantastic ending point.
Awesome questions, Janet, by the way.
Were there more? Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I thought you were telling me that there were more good questions on the side. I'm like, oh, how did I miss those? I thought I was checking.
No, you did. I was just saying general because it was a good talk. You really gave us a good question.
Hey, this is our topic. You know, this is where we, as historical novelists, we get like, you know, we hit our stride.
I just want to interject real quick that I know I see some people who are attending that I have not seen in years. And, you know, I am just, you know, I love you. Thank you for coming and attending this. You know, someday we'll get together. But, you know, this is awesome.
And
Yes, and please check out our webpage for more info on our panelists. Not only that, there's a little link there in your chat. We also have buy links there. Please buy our books.
And I'm going to thank the members of my readers group for being here. Thank you, Ben and Karen.
Yeah, I was really excited recently to realize that I could buy so many of the novels on Kindle. So I have become a purchaser.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is very cool. I just put up, I put this up late and I apologize, but bookshop.org, you can buy books directly from, you input your own zip code and you can buy the paperback books directly from your local bookstore.
Support your local independent
the
bookstore.
bookstores in Santa Clarita, and you can absolutely put those in and buy the books there. So, you know,
Pine Mountain Club, California.
there you go.
Yeah, and you can buy them directly from bookshop.org. As Janet has posted in our chat, she's got little links to all of us. Thank you, Janet.
I am sorry I didn't do that earlier. I intended to, and then I didn't hit the return.
You were busy, darling. You were asking us wonderful questions.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Okay,
you.
well,
And thanks,
really
Morgan.
quickly. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to thank you all again so
Oh,
much
thank
for
you,
lending
Janice.
your stories, your expertise, and your wonderful senses of humor as well. It's just a treat for me to be able to sit in and call it work. So
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Morgan.
of course.
Thank you, Morgan.
And everybody who's here, we're having one more history talk in December, the third Monday of December, and we are scheduling more for the spring. I just don't have the dates yet, but keep tuned and posted to our calendar. With that, we'll wrap up and see you all in approximately a month.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
Bye.
Thank you, guys.
so much.
Bye.